Pompey was gone. The war was over. Yet Rome's streets did not feel lighter, and its air did not feel free. The shadow of victory lingered longer than any army, stretching across the hills, through the Senate, and even into the chambers of foreign courts. Caesar stood in Alexandria, far from the roads he had conquered and the enemies he had crushed, yet somehow here in the opulent sunlight of Egypt. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than any battlefield he had ever faced. Alexandria's harbors shimmered with golden reflections of the Mediterranean sun. Ships, both Roman and Egyptian, bobbed lazily, unaware that the man who had toppled armies now walked among them, scrutinizing every mast, every sail. He observed the grain shipments, the merchants negotiating the price of wheat, the careful accounting of stores that would soon feed the citizens of Rome. To the untrained eye, Caesar's interest might have seemed like routine diligence. His mind was already several steps ahead, imagining how Rome would receive his actions, how the Republic would react if he delayed or overstepped, how the Senate might interpret his absence. Egypt was supposed to be a pause, a brief closing chapter before the triumphant return to Rome. Instead, it became a turning point. Caesar stayed not for comfort, not for curiosity, but out of necessity. The political chaos of Alexandria mirrored the instability of Rome itself. Grain, the lifeblood of the Republic, had to flow uninterrupted. The succession crisis that followed Pharaoh Ptolemy's faltering authority required a hand firm enough to stabilize it. And Caesar's hand was decisive, practiced in both steel and negotiation. He often walked through the palace gardens, the scent of exotic flowers mingling with the dry, warm air, and thought about power in ways he had never permitted himself before. Crossing the Rubicon had been a declaration, a point of no return. Defeating Pompey had been a lesson in resilience and strategy. But here, in the mosaic, tiled halls and under the shadow of Cleopatra's throne, he considered a different lesson, that power without perception is fragile, that loyalty could be manufactured, and that Rome, far away, might no longer dictate the limits of ambition. Cleopatra ruled Egypt, a queen crowned with legitimacy yet living on the watchful gaze of Rome's conqueror. Every gesture she made, every word she spoke, was measured, aware that Caesar's presence reshaped the rules of authority. She did not need to assert dominance. She already knew that influence flowed to those who commanded respect and understanding. Their early meetings were devoid of flirtation. They spoke of fleets and trade, of grain, citric, and alliances. Cleopatra's intelligence was sharp, honed by centuries of dynastic intrigue, and Caesar responded not with awe, but with careful attention. Power, he recognized, could be observed as easily as it could be exercised. At night, he walked along the Nile, observing the reflexing of the white water that had witnessed centuries of kings and pharaohs. Thoughts of Rome, its senators, its citizens, its complicated dance of fear and admiration, permeated his mind. Alexandria felt timeless, but the Republic was urgent, brittle, and alive in its judgments. Honors voted in absentia, statutes proposed, proclamations made, all intended as celebration, felt to Caesar like tightening chains. He understood the subtlety of this tension. The applause of crowds and the whispers of senators were warily aligned. Cleopatra joined him during these walks, asking a single, piercing question. "Did they fear you yet?" Caesar did not answer, but the question lingered, illuminating the truth that even victory breeds unease. He ruled without a title, and in doing so, unsettled Rome more than any crown could. Courts obeyed him, kings deferred to him, and power flowed toward him naturally. Reports came daily, disputes in Egypt resolved, fleets organized, grain shipments approved, all without Senate intervention. Every action was sensible, when yet every action bypassed the constraints of the Republic. Caesar understood that perception was power, that inaction was dangerous, and that waiting for the right moment often meant creating it himself. Cleopatra's subtle mastery lay in public display. She did not elevate Caesar above her, nor did she diminish him. They ruled side by side, and the symbolism of their partnership carried more weight than any verbal proclamation. Egyptian coins soon bore her likeness alongside Roman influence. Soldiers noticed the alignment, Merchants observed it, and Rome, even at a distance, began to murmur. When news arrived that Cleopatra was pregnant, the implications were clear: permanence, lineage, legacy. Caesar's influence was not transient. It would echo for generations. Rome's whispers grew louder. The Senate deliberated, titles were granted, honors bestowed, each gesture intended to constrain what they could not openly control. Caesar accepted all honors, aware that refusal might signal weakness, and Rome punished weakness more cruelly than ambition. In the quiet of the night, he pondered the nature of power. The Republic forgives error, mediocrity, failure, but never supremacy. It respects only what it can challenge and control. Egypt mirrored what Rome denied: stability through unity, order through singular authority. Caesar recognized that he could not remain indefinitely. Staying too long would signal surrender to Rome's fear. Returning too soon would risk confrontation. Cleopatra warned him gently: Rome destroys what it cannot control. Caesar smiled. He had survived greater threats than fear, and he chose Rome. The Senate's decision to appoint him dictator without a defined term acknowledged a reality they refused to admit. Rome was no longer master of Caesar. He was master of Rome. Reforms follow where matrons rewarded, provinces reorganized. The people adored him, the Senate feared him. He did not abolish the Senate, he left it intact yet irrelevant. Statues appeared, garlands placed, and when a crown was touched upon one, he removed it, but the impression remained. Rome saw not what he refused, but what the people desired. Whispers of kingship returned, carried not by enemies, but by citizens, like assured the Republic's future. Caesar ignored them, believing that action outweighed rumor. That was a mistake. Marcus Junius Brutus, honorable, philosophical, conflicted, entered the circle of history. The conspirators did not choose him for hatred, but for conscience, duty, morality, philosophy. These were the weapons they sharpened, not steel. Caesar saw enemies clearly, but he did not see the subtle corrosion of loyalty, the quiet anger of ideals betrayed by reality. Omens appeared, strange signs at night, sudden dreams of blood, warnings that would chill lesser men. Caesar laughed. The conspirators met frequently, plotting with a quiet intensity, convinced they would save the Republic. The Ides of March approached. The Senate chose the place of history, the Senate House beneath Pompey's statue. Symbolism, not secrecy. On that day, history would turn. Calpurnia dreamed of rivers of blood and begged him to remain home. For the first time in years, Caesar hesitated. But Decius Brutus arrived, persuasive, framing fear as weakness, mocking hesitation, warning that absence would appear cowardly. Caesar dressed, ignored the dread, and walked into history. A soothsayer's voice echoed again, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughed. "They are here," he said, not knowing they were not yet past. Inside the Senate, the conspirators formed a circle too close. Casca struck first, panic immediate. Blades came from every direction. Then he saw Brutus. His resistance ended, not in fear but in heartbreak. He fell beneath Pompey's statue. The assassins expected cheers. Rome was silent. Mark Antony watched. At the funeral, he spoke softly, praised honor, revealed the wounds, named the traitors. The crowd's grief became fury. The Republic's illusion fractured. The conspirators fled. Brutus learned too late that you can kill a man but not what he represents. Caesar was dead, but his shadow would rule Rome. A young Octavian watched, learning, waiting, and the world would never be the same. After returning to Rome, Caesar's presence was felt everywhere, even in the streets he had yet to cross. Citizens whispered his name, as if it were a force of nature. They could neither stop nor resist. Merchants, soldiers, and senators alike observed him, noting the subtle ways he moved, spoke, and commanded attention. Power, once an abstract concept, now had a shape, a smell, a cadence. It was Caesar. He moved through the forum with deliberate steps. Every glance, every gesture carried meaning. Children pointed, soldiers saluted, and even the pigeons seemed to scatter differently in his shadow. Rome's citizens were captivated, their loyalty cultivated, not by law, but by observation. Caesar understood this profoundly. People what they respected. They adored what they desired, and they feared what they could not predict. The Senate convened, trembling under the invisible pressure of his gaze. Senators whispered, some carefully composing words of flattery, others carefully plotting the man who had become the embodiment of Rome's might. He did not rush them. Patience was a weapon more subtle than a sword. Each vote, each motion, each pause in speech was measured to teach, to persuade, to dominate without overt force. His reforms were swift and unrelenting. Debts were recalibrated to relieve the suffering of the people while rewarding loyalty among creditors. Veterans, those who had fought in his campaigns and survived, were granted lands and privileges, their devotion cemented in gratitude. Provinces were reorganized to increase efficiency, while governors were carefully selected, blending competence and loyalty. Every action had purpose, every decree calculated, yet all appeared seamless, inevitable, righteous. The Senate could do little but observe, murmuring complaints under their breath. Power was slipping from their grasp, quietly, imperceptibly, like water through fingers. Statues of Caesar began appearing in temples and forums, each one subtly larger than the last. Garlands adorned them, citizens offered flowers. When someone placed a crown atop a statue, Caesar removed it, but the effect remained. Rome no longer debated what he would accept or reject. They debated how far he would go. Whispers of kingship grew louder, yet Caesar ignored them, focusing instead on the mechanics of governance. To him, kingship was a word, not a threat. It was the perception of absolute authority that mattered, the quiet submission of tradition and protocol to efficiency and results. Brutus, meanwhile, watched with conflicted eyes. He respected Caesar, admired his vision, yet feared what one man's power could do of checks and balances. Conspirators began to coalesce, each motivated by ideology rather than envy. They chose Brutus not for hatred, but for conscience. Theirs was a moral calculation, duty to the republic above loyalty to a friend. Each meeting was a careful dance of words and philosophy, discussing virtue, freedom, and the erosion of Rome's founding principles. Caesar, immersed in governance and oblivious to their plotting, did not see the quiet storm gathering in the marble halls he once commanded. Omens began to manifest. The river Tiber ran oddly in spring. Eclipses cast long shadows over the forum, and dreams of blood haunted more than one senator. Caesar laughed at such signs, for he had faced armies, storms, betrayal, and death, and survived. But Suqua survived. Suqua had a way of embedding itself in those closest to him. Daily, letters arrived from Egypt, updates on Cleopatra, the young heir, the stability of grain shipments, and the shifting tides of influence in the Mediterranean. Caesar read each carefully, knowing that Rome's fought carefully, depended as much on the deserts of Egypt as it did on the cobbled streets of the Forum. Political power was a network, and he was the node at the center. Yet even as he planned, he sensed unease. The loyalty of friends was fragile, the patience of allies even more so. The Ides of March approached with a slow inevitability. Senators moved as if rehearsing words chosen, glances exchanged. The conspirators did not fear Caesar's blade, they feared the consequences of his unchecked authority. Meetings were held in quiet chambers, oaths sworn beneath the dim light of oil lamps, and Brutus wrestled with his conscience. He loved the Republic, yet he loved Caesar. The dichotomy would define him forever. Meanwhile, Caesar's public appearances became theatrical, yet natural. He addressed crowds with a calm authority, his voice carrying over the forum, blending persuasion and reassurance. Citizens cheered, unaware of the subtle threat lurking in every corner of the Senate. Statues, coins, and proclamations silently reminded them. Who commanded the present? Who shaped the future? In Caesar, Rome saw both salvation and subjugation. Political reforms intensified. He revised taxation, streamlined bureaucracy, and balanced Rome's finances while ensuring public displays of generosity. Soldiers were fed, streets clean, festivals celebrated, all designed to foster loyalty and admiration. Every action reinforced the perception of a leader who could achieve what institutions had failed to accomplish. Yet beneath this, anxiety simmered. The Senate, composed of men who once held unchallenged authority, now found their power hollowed. Murmurs of king traveled through corridors, whispered in private homes, repeated by those who feared for their place. To Caesar, this was distant noise. He focused on efficiency, on results, on the tangible impact of his decisions. But Rome's elite felt the slow tightening of a leash they could not resist. Brutus' internal conflict deepened. He attended council meetings, observed the subtle manipulation of law and tradition, and spoke carefully, sometimes dissenting, sometimes silent. He understood the danger, but could he act? Could he justify the unthinkable? Each glance at Caesar, every memory of their shared loyalty, weighed on him. Philosophy, duty, and morality clashed violently in his mind, a storm he could not calm. As the Ides approached, omens intensified. Birds flew in strange formations, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and dreams of blood haunted the capital. Caesar remained unperturbed, laughing at superstition, relying instead on his own judgment. Yet those closest to him, the conspirators in waiting, interpreted each sign as confirmation. Rome itself seemed to whisper warnings, a voice that only those attuned to fear could hear. Mark Antony, ever watchful, assessed the political landscape. Caesar's strength was undeniable, yet so was the fragility of loyalty around him. He observed the conspirators, the subtle shifts in the Senate, and the tension simmering beneath the surface of every public assembly. He knew the danger was not the soldiers, not the people, but the men who loved Rome as much as they feared Caesar. Caesar's nights were restless despite his outward composure. Thoughts of Egypt, Cleopatra, and the future heir interwove with plans for Rome's administration. He pondered loyalty, power, and the legacy of decisions made in moments of triumph. His insight into strategy had always been exceptional, yet he underestimated the quiet patience of those who opposed him, those who acted not from hate, but from moral certainty. Rome itself seemed to hold its breath. The streets, usually alive with noise, carried a sense of expectation, as if even the stones knew what was coming. Senators met in quiet chambers, their voices hushed, their words measured. Caesar's reforms had been efficient, his influence undeniable. Yet the Republic's traditions, fragile as glass, were cracking under the weight of his authority. The city waited, unaware that history was about to unfold within the marble halls of its own Senate. Brutus walked through the forum, observing the citizenry. They smiled, cheered, and bowed to Caesar, yet Brutus could not join their adulation. Love for Caesar warred with his devotion to Rome. He remembered campaigns together, victories shared, plans forged in fire and luck, yet of the Republic, of checks and balances, of freedom beyond the whim of one man, haunted him. Every glance at Caesar, every speech delivered to the masses, reminded him of the peril hidden behind the applause. The conspirators convened, their group small but resolute. Casca, Cinversaeus, Gloius, all shared a single understanding: Caesar's life could end, but the Republic's survival demanded their action. Philosophy guided them, not hatred. They spoke of virtue, liberty, and the necessity of sacrifice, carefully framing murder as the ultimate moral act. Each argument was rehearsed, each phrase carefully measured to justify what otherwise could never be justified. Omens intensified. The sky above Rome darkened unnaturally. Birds flew in chaotic patterns, and rivers that shakes wind could not name. Senators dreamed of blood of falling men, and of the consequences of failure. Caesar laughed at superstition, yet even he could not escape the subtle pressure of fate pressing against the city. Rome whispered warnings to those who listened. The conspirators listened closely. Caesar's public appearances continued, radiant and commanding. He walked through the forum, his toga flowing, laurel crown gleaming in the sun, addressing the people with calm authority. Citizens cheered, unaware of the quiet plotting unfolding around them. Statues of Caesar multiplied in temples and squares, each one subtly more imposing than the last. Coins bore his likeness. Every public act reinforced the perception of inevitability. Caesar would rule, the Republic would bend, and history would follow. Brutus' inner conflict deepened. He attended meetings with the Senate, observing Caesar's deliberate orchestration of power. The weight of friendship, loyalty, and duty pressed against him. The lust of prestige commanded, and yet the vision of a single man, Holding absolute power terrified him. The arguments of the conspirators were convincing, yet each night, Brutus wrestled with the memory of Caesar's kindness, his brilliance, his vision. Could he justify betrayal? Could he commit murder in the name of duty? Meanwhile, Caesar's administrative efficiency reshaped the city. Veterans were rewarded, debts recalibrated, plets recalibrated, provinces realigned. The citizens loved him, the Senate feared him. Every reform, every decree, every symbolic act increased his grip on Rome. Yet in the quiet moments, when the applause faded and the crowds dispersed, he pondered the fragility of loyalty, the weight of absolute power. Mark Antony watched silently, understanding the delicate balance of influence and danger. He observed the conspirators, noting the subtle tension, the glances exchanged, the quiet murmurs that signaled intent. Antony recognized the stakes. Caesar was powerful, but the moral conviction of men who loved Rome as deeply as they feared him could be deadly. His mind calculated, anticipating the moves of both friend and foe. Omens escalated. The Tiber's flow carried shapes that frightened more than one senator. Animals behaved strangely, dreams of blood and betrayal haunted households. Caesar dismissed these portents as trivial, yet the conspirators interpreted them as confirmation of inevitability. Fate, they believed, was aligning itself with their cause, preparing Rome for the decisive act that would reshape history. Letters from Egypt continued to arrive, updates on Cleopatra, the hair, and the stability of the Nile grain shipments. Caesar read them meticulously, aware that Rome's survival depended on both distant lands and the streets at home. Yet even in the precision of governance, he remained unaware that danger was converging within his own city, within the Senate chambers, among men he considered friends. Every day, Caesar walked through Rome as though it were his theater. Citizens cheered, but whispers persisted. Statues rose in plazas, garlands adorned temples. Coins bore his image. Authority had become instinctive. Rome obeyed because it believed Caesar was inevitable. Yet the Senate, silent and calculating, moved with patience, knowing that even the most powerful man could be felled by those closest to him. Brutus wrestled with morality and pragmatism. He admired Caesar, respected his genius, and yet feared the concentration of power. He recalled their campaigns, the nights of strategy and debate, the victories shared on foreign soil, and he went with a fragile construct threatened by one man's ambition, however noble. Each night, sleep came reluctantly, haunted by the Hunsica Flilim before him. The conspirators rehearsed, sharpened their resolve, and aligned their intentions. Casca would strike first. Decimus would guide Caesar into the Senate house. Brutus would face him, the ultimate moral confrontation. Trebonius would ensure Antony was absent, unaware of the coming storm. Every role was preordained, every step rehearsed, every heartbeat measured. Fate, it seemed, had written the script. Caesar, oblivious to the plotting, prepared for the day, as he always did. He donned the laurel wreath, inspected the Senate documents, and greeted citizens with calm authority. A soothsayer reminded him, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughed, his brilliance unquestioned. The world saw a leader, powerful and unstoppable. History would see something different. The city itself seemed to conspire. Every shadow felt longer, every whisper sharper. Rome waited for the Ides, and the Ides waited for Rome. Brutus conscience cum de conspiration, loyalty and fear. Each conspirator prepared mentally, rehearsing the arguments they would never speak aloud, justifying the act to themselves and to history. The stage was set, the players in place, and the script, written in the blood of fate, awaited performance. The morning of the Ides arrived, crisp and shadowed with tension. The city seemed to hold its breath. The usual bustle muted as if anticipating the unfolding of history. Calpurnia awoke first, her face pale with dread. Dreams of rivers of blood had haunted her sleep, visions of Caesar falling beneath knives she could not prevent. She implored him to remain home, to delay, to consider that fate might not favor his pride. Caesar, as ever, met her gaze calmly. "Fear is a shadow, my wife," he said. "I have faced shadows before, and I have walked through them. Yet beneath the stoicism, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. And he remembered crossing the Rubicon, the battle's betrayals when victory had been uncertain. And now, in Rome's heart, history awaited him once more. Decius arrived shortly after dawn. He carried with him the skill of persuasion, the practiced eloquence of a man who understood how men could be swayed by pride and honor. He spoke of the Senate's intentions, of the disgrace Caesar would invite by refusing to attend. Absence, he explained, would make him appear weak, unfit to lead the Republic. Even in its admiration of him, Caesar considered the argument. Duty, reputation, history itself pressed him forward. He dressed carefully, donning the laurel wreath, the white and red toga flowing with authority, and stepped into the morning sun. A soothsayer appeared once more, standing by the edge of the Senate path. "Beware the Ides of March," he warned, voice low, tremulous, yet carrying a certainty that sent chills through the few who lingered. Caesar chuckled softly, waving the warning aside. Superstition had never guided his decisions, and he would not allow it to do so now. Yet even as he strode through the columns of the Senate House, a subtle tension clung to the air, a prelude to what was coming. Inside the Senate, the conspirators awaited. Casca Cinna, Decimus, Trebonius, and Brutus had aligned themselves like instruments in a deadly symphony. The plan was precise. Each man knew his role, the timing, the approach. The Senate House was filled with marble shadows and sunlight streaming through the high windows, painting the floors in gold and silver streaks. The air smelled faintly of ink, marble polish, and wax from the lamps left burning overnight. Caesar entered, the Senate rising in acknowledgement. His presence commanded respect and awe. Even the conspirators could not deny the gravity he radiated. Casca struck first, a swift motion, a flash of steel. Shock rippled across the chamber. Blades followed, each man striking with precision and urgency. Caesar's movements were instinctive. He parried, twisted, resisted, but the numbers pressed upon him. Then, at the center of the storm, he saw Brutus. The expression was familiar, almost tender, yet it was edged with resolve. Caesar's breath caught, the realization unfolding too late. Not fear, not anger, but heartbreak dominated his senses. Each blow from the conspirators was a betrayal of history itself, each stab a fracture in the foundations of Rome. He fell beneath the statue of Pompey, blood flowing into the carved marble floor, with the shadows cast by the rising sun. The Senate waited in silence, anticipating chaos, yet the city seemed stunned into stillness. Mark Antony, standing nearby, watched, assessing, calculating, knowing that the Republic had changed irreversibly in a single moment. The conspirators expected applause, perhaps even relief. Instead, the room held its breath. Silence answered their act. Rome itself had paused, uncertain how to respond to the fall of the man who had become its embodiment. Antony's face betrayed nothing, but his mind raced. He would act, yes, but with caution. Every word, every gesture had to be measured, for Caesar's death had created both opportunity and danger. At the funeral, Antony spoke softly, almost mournfully at first. He praised Caesar's honor, his courage, his contributions to Rome, and slowly, with increasing intensity, he revealed the wounds, the betrayal, and the conspirators' identities. The crowd's grief shifted, transformed into outrage. Murmurs grew into cries, sorrow became fury. Rome burned with emotion, and the seeds of civil war were sown once more. The conspirators fled, their victory hollow and uncertain. Brutus, the moral agent of the act, understood too late that killing a man does not erase the ideas he inspired, nor does it stop the momentum of destiny. Caesar's vision, his shadow, his influence, remained alive in every citizen who had witnessed his rule, every soldier who had fought at his side, every young man watching closely from the winds of history. Among them was a boy named Octavian. Observant, intelligent, patient beyond his years, he watched the unfolding chaos. He noted the fierce courage and cowardice, the loyalty and betrayal. His mind catalogued every detail, every glance at Antony, every whisper of the conspirators, every tear of the populace was stored, analyzed, and understood. The future of Rome would bear his mark as surely as Caesar's had. The city continued to pulse with unrest. Markets thrived, citizens spoke in hushed tones of what had occurred, and senators debated the morality of their act. Antony, loyal yet cunning, began rallying support, turning grief into purpose, sorrow into strategy. The streets, though calm on the surface, were simmering with tension and expectation. Rome had lost its most brilliant general, yet the heartbeat of a republic had not ceased. It had shifted, changed, and grown more dangerous. Even in death, Caesar's presence dominated the minds of men. Statues were defaced and revered in turn. Coins, once symbols of authority, now carried stories of betrayal. Cleopatra received news from Alexandria, her own position precarious, yet strengthened by the enduring influence of the man she had aligned with. The Mediterranean, the Nile, and the distant provinces all acknowledged the shifting tides of power. Octavian, small but perceptive, observed Antony rallying the people. He saw the way words could inflame, how speeches could channel grief into action. He saw the Senate's panic, the conspirators' fleeing steps, and realized the world was a stage where power demanded both vision and patience. He learned in hours what others took years to understand, that history favors those who watch as closely as they act, who wait as deliberately as they strike. Rome would never forget Caesar, not in memory, not in loyalty, not in fear. His life had been brief, his victories extraordinary, and his death monumental. Yet the shadow he cast would endure, shaping the republic, the empire, and the generations that followed. Even in absence, he influenced every decision, every allegiance, every uprising. The republic had survived his death, but it had been changed forever, subtly, irrevocably, and in ways the conspirators could never control. And so, the cycle of power continued. Rome had witnessed the rise of a general, the consolidation of absolute authority, and the consequences of unchallenged ambition. The people, the Senate, and even distant rulers recognized that history had shifted. One man's life had altered the trajectory. Next generation, represented by Octavian, would inherit both the opportunities and the burdens left behind. As the sun set over the Forum, casting long golden shadows across the marble streets, the city hummed with the silent promise of more to come. Power, betrayal, loyalty, and destiny intertwined in ways the citizens could scarcely comprehend. And in the quiet corners, the young and observant prepared, knowing that Rome would need guidance, strategy, and patience to navigate the aftermath of the greatest man it had ever seen. Caesar was gone, but Rome's story was only beginning.